How are Black youth coping with the realities of COVID-19 at home, school, or elsewhere? Join us for a virtual conversation on youth, sexuality, identity, and parental authority amid COVID-19. Panelists Dr. Wesley Crichlow, professor at Ontario Tech University and chair, President's Equity Taskforce. Samir Adam, lawyer at Public Prosecution Service of Canada. Nicolette Vardon, chairperson, Colors of Mama Ottawa. Moderator Salima Versi, psychotherapist and spiritual caregiver. Mama Watali is an Ottawa-based nonprofit organization with an international reach.
Mama Watali means in the absence of a mother, and it comes from the Bantu language of Luganda. And it was born after my mom passed away. Now, the organization is really at the core to serve Black women that have suffered personal loss, whether it is through loss of a loved one, but most especially because of domestic or what is sometimes referred to as intimate partner violence. When women go through violence of any kind, women just need somewhere to turn and talk to somebody, either in search of resources or just somebody to listen and validate what they're going through as they try to recover and rebuild their lives.
Mama Watali was founded to support survivors of gender-based violence and to create awareness of the challenges women continue to face.
We are doing advocacy work at all levels of government, from municipal, provincial, to national level, because women's rights essentially are human rights. And at the core of the human rights is the equality of both men and women.
Founded by Susan Namulindwa, Mama Watali has successfully undertaken several projects nationally and internationally, including the creation of a library in Uganda.
When I was a little girl, I loved to read. I remember being in a boarding school and splitting novels with my friends so that we could read. So I used this opportunity of being in Ottawa to collect books from my children's school boards, and with the help of lottery and volunteers, we transported those books to Luero and set up a community library. We were able to distribute books to neighboring schools so that they could use them to elevate the education in the area. We have also done community microcredits for women in Luero still and in Uganda in general. And we also were able to get school fees for girls. These are girls that will be high achievers for secondary school who would not have gone to school otherwise. So those are some of the things we have done in the past. Right now, our target market is right here in Canada mostly. Black women, new immigrant women that have been affected by domestic violence, intimate partner violence, or any kind of loss. So we are setting up community support circles. So we are encouraging women to get in touch and find just some either professional help or women that have also gone through what you're going through to support you. Sometimes it's just a shoulder to lean on, or somebody to say, you know what, I've made it. If I made it, you can make it. So we are really trying not to talk about being victims. We are talking about overcoming.
The vision of Mama Watali is to give voice to the lives of Black women in all its dimensions.
Well, most of us have seen or witnessed a situation that we know is wrong. We know somebody who is going through some kind of abuse, some woman who needs intervention, but sometimes we don't know how to do it. So we want to put volunteer resources together so that people know how they can help in a way that is helpful for the family and helpful for the woman or the women that are going through it, so they can move forward with their children. We are putting together resources for parenting. How do you parent? How do we parent boys and girls to make sure that the boys know that they don't have to be abusive? This is not a power struggle, that they can have healthy relationships. We need to emphasize the fact that when a girl or a woman says no, that no means no. And there is no reason why, as a society or as a community, we should turn around and blame the victims after they have been abused. So currently we are holding a series of conversations. So these are weekly conversations around issues that affect women. I want to call strong men out there, strong women out there, but especially strong men. This work is not about women versus men. We need to hear the male voices. There is a lot of good, strong men out there that fight day and night for their families, that go out every day to protect their families. We need to hear your voices. We need to hear you add your voices to this work, because, the family is the core foundation of our community. So if we have broken families, we are going to have a broken community. So a family is the nucleus of the community. So if we build strong families, we will build a strong community. Jump in and let us do this work together.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Salima Versi, and I am your moderator for this really incredible discussion. I'm actually coming to you from Edmonton, which is Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Dene and the Cree and the Blackfoot and the Métis. And I'm thrilled to be virtually joining. Most of you, I think, are in Ottawa. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. This panel has a great deal of expertise and very rich experiences that I think are going to make this a really, really excellent conversation. But I'd like to begin by asking Talisa Singh McKay to give the land acknowledgement for the folks that are in Ottawa.
We gather this afternoon on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge that they lived here before us and keep living here now. Reconnaître le terrain sur lequel nous vivons est une invitation pour nous à reconnaître l'histoire de la terre, des gens et de la connectivité pour donner un sens à ces connexions. By learning where we live, we honor the cultures and practices of the people of this land and continue to be aware of and participate in the healing process of colonization and intergenerational trauma. As a woman born in this country to immigrant parents, myself and my family are guests. Je vous appelle à reconnaître que vous êtes également des invités et des gardiens aussi. As an organization that advocates for support of Black women and families who experience personal loss, all forms of intimate and gender violence and harassment through a historically patriarchal and racist system, we recognize the mirrored hardships faced by Indigenous people. Nous reconnaissons comme des personnes de couleur également opprimées que les ancêtres des peuples autochtones ont été dépossédés, se sont fait arracher leurs enfants et leur culture a été dépouillée. Que les esprits de votre peuple apportent la force d'avancer tout au long du chemin vers l'émancipation. May the spirits of your people bring forth the strength to move forward throughout the journey to emancipation. The patriarchal systems in place have damaged all of us, our families, our friends, our personal environments. Nous nous voyons à travers les yeux. Nous nous embrassons et nous agissons. Nous ne sommes pas les spectateurs. We are not bystanders. As we celebrate the UN decade for people of African descent, let us remember our ancestors, those who were enslaved, the mothers and their children who were raped and continued to be sold into slavery. May their spirits give us strength to uplift our voices as we continue their journey to freedom and equity. Alors que nous célébrons la décennie des Nations Unies pour les personnes d'ascendance africaine, souvenons-nous de nos ancêtres, de ceux qui ont été réduits en esclavage, des mères et de leurs enfants qui ont été violés et ont continué d'être vendus comme esclaves. Puis, leur esprit nous donnait la force de lever nos voix alors que nous poursuivons leur chemin de la liberté et l'équité. Thank you. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Talisa. So today's conversation is going to speak specifically to issues faced by the youth, but I think starting with a land acknowledgement is always an important way for us to recognize that we're part of a larger conversation around justice and equity and oppression. And so today's will definitely be part of that. The specific topic for today is about youth, sexuality, identity, and parental authority, particularly amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. And now I want to introduce you to our incredible panelists. So we have Samir Adam, who is a prosecutor with the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. He has previously worked as the provincial crown attorney and practiced for 10 years as a criminal defense lawyer. His area of expertise are criminal and regulatory law. Then we have Dr. Wesley Crichlow, who is a critical race theory scholar and a professor at Ontario Tech University, as well as a Black queer community scholar activist with over 20 years of community mobilization and development. As a scholar, he specializes in critical race theory, intersectional analysis, Black queerness and Black masculinity, mentoring young Black scholars, as well as Caribbean diasporic studies. And he is currently investigating how the carceral setting of gender influences the experience of Black LGBTQ re-entry. He's also been appointed to a number of different positions related to anti-Black racism and equity and diversity, as well as mental health amongst Black Canadians, and continues to serve the various communities that he belongs to in quite a number of ways. His CV was very impressive. And last but not least, we have Nicolette Vardon, who is representing our young folks on this lovely panel of ours. She has recently gotten her BA honors in political science from Carleton, and is now pursuing a paralegal certificate at Algonquin College. Nicolette is also the current chairperson for Colors of Mama Ottawa. Her focus is centered around Caribbean and South Asian backgrounds. And through her community work with local organizations in tandem with her academic endeavors, she is hoping to support racialized communities, especially those of African, Caribbean, and Black descent. I hope you're as excited about this panel as I am. I'm really, really looking forward to learning and hearing what they have to say about this topic, which is obviously, I think, particularly pressing right now, but certainly has always been an area that needs more space, I think, than sometimes it gets. So I wanted to start with Nicolette, who's kind of our resident young person. Since our topic is youth, I wanted to give her the floor first. Nicolette, I was wondering if you could just tell us a bit about yourself and what your challenges have been like this year during the pandemic.
Definitely. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicolette. As Salima kindly introduced me, I am a recent grad and I'm also a student again. I'm a first-time mom. I have a very, very busy 13-month-old, so I'm quite busy at home. I do a lot of community work through Colors of Mama, and I used to work with the African Caribbean Mentorship Program. I'm one of their co-founders. So that's a little bit about me. This year, the past year with COVID, it's been very busy, I guess, with all these things going on, but also difficult. It's totally different to be confined to your home to do all of your work, and you're stuck inside with your family members and your partner. It's totally different ballgame than you're usually exposed to. And especially as a student, I'm experiencing major Zoom burnout. I think I'm tired of, having to be on the computer all the time. I'm not used to that. I'm used to, leaving the house and going to my lecture or whatnot, getting away from your partner for a little bit. And that's something that I think as we get into this conversation, we need to discuss too, because with COVID, there's so many added stresses to the family dynamic, the partner dynamic, and your relationship with your education. So I find during this whole pandemic, that's the biggest thing, is just being stuck in your home with your partner, with your family, and adjusting to that.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine, right? Like I also have 2 little kids, so I know that struggle pretty well. And I think it has been hard for a lot of us being stuck in the home. I'm curious about, because I do want to loop back to that, but I also am wondering if you can tell us a bit about what your life was like growing up. Like I found myself thinking about that a lot. Like what would it have been like if I'd been stuck in the home with the family that I grew up with rather than just the one that I've got right now? So if you feel comfortable, I'd love to hear more about your life growing up, and in particular, like kind of how it ties into the topic of today, right? So what your relationship with your parents was like and how that affected your identity and your sexual development and those kinds of pieces.
Definitely. So I'm the youngest of three, and my siblings are actually like 18 years and 16 years older than me. So I was pretty much an only child growing up. My parents were together almost my whole life. And I was the baby of the family. And that being said, I was very sheltered, very protected when it came to my parenting. We didn't talk about sexuality. We didn't talk about sexual identity in the home. And my parents being immigrants, my mom's Guyanese, my dad's Pakistani. So very taboo to talk about sex in the home or sexual identity. So if any of those questions arose in my head, it was like, okay, this is an embarrassing topic. We're not going to talk about it. And yeah, that was kind of how I grew up. So when I guess anything came up where my friends were dating, I was like, okay, like, what do I do? Right. This was like such a weird thing. And you kind of just go based off of your peers, go based off of what's around you. And that's a really scary world to live in, because you don't have any expectations. You're not empowered in your sexuality. You're not empowered to be confident in yourself or demand what you want, or be confident to say yes or no. And that's the biggest thing, I think, for me, especially when I got older and I went to high school and I was dating. And I think learning to say no, or learning that it's okay not to feel that pressure, or you're not at the same level as everyone else, it's totally fine. You don't have to be the same as your peers. You don't have to be who your boyfriend says your boyfriend will always say, my friend's girlfriend does this and yada, yada, yada. You don't have to do that. And I think if you are able to have that relationship with your parents where you can, ask questions, or it's not an embarrassing thing, you're not scared of it, it's a lot easier to have those conversations and be confident in yourself. And with that in mind, I think in my home, if there were family members or people that we knew that, were not cisgendered heterosexual, it was very hush hush. No one spoke about it. So that kind of imparted on me. And that's something that I have to deal with on a regular basis as well. And I have to kind of unlearn that as well. So I think my parenting really shaped that aspect of my sexual identity as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm so curious, given that you couldn't go to your parents and it was such an uncomfortable kind of conversation, and but it's still clear to me that you've managed to shift your thinking around these things and that's now affecting you as an adult. How did you learn those things? How did you pick them up along the way? Was it peers? Did you have other touch points? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this when I was thinking about the questions and everything. And I really thought about when I was in I think I was in grade 6 or 7, and there was one of the first girls had a boyfriend, and everyone was like, oh, this is so weird, ew, gross. But a few weeks later, and maybe a couple months later, everyone had a boyfriend, or they were dating as much as you can date in the 6th grade.
Right.
But yeah, and I think that really describes how I personally learned about relationships or sexuality, because I just learned what my friends were doing, what my friends talked about. And I mean, they teach you the science in school, but it was more about rumors and fitting in, and, oh, we did this, or your friends come and tell you the gossip. And the biggest part for me that I would say shaped my sexuality. I mean, you start high school when you're 14, and I had a high school boyfriend all through high school. And that shaped my sexuality a lot. There's expectations, and going into high school, to be very frank, I didn't know anything. I was just going with the flow, and I wasn't very confident. And because I didn't know anything and I wasn't very empowered in it, I wasn't confident in myself enough to question anything, if that makes sense. When my friends would tell me something, or my boyfriend told me something, or whatever, I just took it as Bible, and yeah, that's a big thing. And in high school, half the things you hear your friends will brag about, it's probably not even true. Honestly, but you take it as is. And yeah,
so you kind of do become this sponge, right? You just kind of take in whatever you can because there's nothing filling that space.
Definitely.
I'm curious for you now, as a parent, you know, having learned and unlearned a various sort of set of things now around this idea of identity and sexuality, are there things in particular that you really want for your relationship with your child and how that would change how you interacted as a parent?
Definitely. I think as a parent now, I see things so much differently. I picked up on things that that my parents said to me when I was a kid that I didn't think about before I had a kid. And my partner is Jamaican, so he has his own ideas of sexuality as well. And, you know, we're coming from so many cultures. So that's something that we have to battle daily and be aware of, because we're in a completely different world than our parents were in or that we were in growing up. And our world is becoming so much more open, and our kids need to be able to understand that. And I think for me personally, I mean, my son's only 13 months, but just being like open enough and being close enough to him to know that he can come to me, and it's not a scary thing, it's not a taboo thing. You're not going to get shamed, you're not going to get scolded, you're not going to get yelled at. You know, I had a kid young, and that's very taboo in my family. It's very, you know, oh, you're not married, you're quite young, you didn't finish school yet, right? And for my son, I don't want him to have to be very terrified of those things. I want him to know that this is a supportive environment. And I think that's the hugest thing for me. It's a supportive environment. And yes, you're not going to encourage your kid to do something that might, you know, put their life a little bit off track or get them distracted from their bigger priorities. But at the same time, your child's mental well-being is much more important. Yeah.
No, that's great. I mean, on the same note, I'm curious about, like, you know, looking back at your own childhood and like your mental wellness and like your sense of self. When you look back, is there anything in particular that you're like, oh, this is what I would say to myself back then, or something that like I really wish I had known?
Yes. Like I mentioned, I was in a high school relationship, and for me, it was very mentally draining. And I had a really tough time with it. I was a very anxious person. I was very, I mean, everything was in my home I had to excel at, right? So it was that combined with the relationship was very toxic for me. And I found myself when I went off to university, I struggled fitting in. I struggled making friends and, you know, being alone. And yeah, I think I would tell myself, just ignore everything, that your friends are saying. Just be confident in yourself and trust yourself, because at the end of the day, you always have that feeling and you can trust that feeling, and it's okay. And faith was a big part of it for me. I know everyone has their outlet. For me, just being able to speak to God or speak to somebody, having that faith was an anchor in a way, and an outlet when things were tough or couldn't find an answer. I didn't know who to trust. And along the way, I met amazing people that were kind of on that same level and taught me a lot about myself and how to be more confident. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. And I agree. I think faith is one of those resources that we sometimes underestimate, particularly in communities of color. Certainly in my work as a psychotherapist working in these spaces, like faith is one of those things that keeps coming up consistently. So I think I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to just see what other people think about that, because I'm sure a lot, and I can see from the comments that what you were saying resonated with a bunch of folks. That's great. Professor Crichlow, I'm wondering for you how what Nicolette has been saying relates to maybe your own experiences, but also I'm particularly curious about the research and the work that you've done, and how this applies to other folks, particularly queer communities and queer Black men, and if any of this resonates in what you've learned in those communities.
I think the questions or the challenges around what it means to grow up queer during COVID can be a challenge, because if we understand that the census has indicated to us that by 2016 census says by 51.5% of Toronto's population visible minorities, and by 2031 something like 96% of Canada's population is going to be racialized minorities. It means that what we haven't really accounted for yet is what percentage of that is queer, trans, non-binary, etc. What COVID has also done is, I think, thrown an additional stressor into young people's lives around identity and struggling with identity issues. So you now have kids forming a relationship by force because it's no longer going to school, going to university, at work, at home with parents, in which it could be now for the first time parents are really observing them more closely than in the past because of work, because of school. So there's this close proximity of a relationship that COVID has forced us to develop. So one of the things that I know the early research has already shown us that LGBTQ communities have been impacted severely by COVID. And what that means is that I think, given that Canada does not do much data collection per se around LGBTQ issues, maybe the household survey, yes, but it's not specific. We can concur from this that COVID has undoubtedly created stresses in the home for queer kids, for trans kids. It has also created more stresses, I think, for kids who where they may be living in single house units. So the type of environments that our young people may be living in and dealing with sexuality, sexual orientation, identity issues has now become something compounded with COVID. That, I think, creates mental stresses. And I think as someone who grew up in the Caribbean and came out in Canada, COVID really helped me rethink what it meant to be a queer person in the Caribbean, and in particular coming out in Canada during COVID. So I asked myself, what happens to families right now where they have not had this conversation yet with their kids, or they haven't had this conversation yet with themselves about what it means to be queer? And now you have a policing of their gender, a policing of their sexuality by parents. I think we need to find ways now to address these questions so that the kind of support that Nicolette talked about that she would like to see her son have, the kind of support that we need that groups like Mamawati is providing. How do we get to remove ourselves from these rigid constructions of gender, binary, hetero, homo, and the whole notion of male, female? These are not easy questions in the Black community, and in more so for Black men, where the tropes of Black masculinity is about success, it's about being tough, it's about being heterosexual, and when you have those sort of stresses over your head to succeed, I think what ends up happening is you end up negating a part of your identity to survive, or what Du Bois calls this notion of this double consciousness, always looking at yourself in relationship to others to know who knows I'm gay, who knows I'm queer, who knows I'm trans, who knows I'm in the process of transitioning, et cetera, et cetera. So I think what COVID has really done is brought that question or those issues closer home for some parents. I hope, if anything, it has taught some parents what it means to approach those issues or those questions, given that we did not have the freedom to leave the house, but to provide a kind of support for those young people who are navigating that tough life. I hope COVID has also changed the narrative in some homes and created conversations now that are more open about these issues. There's also a high percentage of Black queer kids who are homeless. And we know that this is across Canada. And I hope that it has not in any way contributed to that homelessness. Rather, I think, I hope it has been an opportunity for communities to respond to that. Homeless shelters are not a nice place for dealing with their sexual orientation per se. And so when we talk about how COVID has changed this and what it means for young queer folks, I would like to see something more for queer folks of color in particular right now, given that most of the services that exist within white organizations or white dominated spaces are not culturally sensitive. And it's not a critique of them, it's just a fact. And so how do we begin to create those spaces in groups like this? How do we start to create those spaces so that references or referrals for Black queer youth, Indo-Caribbean youth, et cetera, can go to these spaces and have that conversation about what it means to come out, to transition, et cetera. So my work now I'm looking at how queer folks who have been incarcerated released to the community and how they understand gender. Because what does it mean to be being released to the community and to start to unpack gender, given that prisons are very rigid around gender constructions? And so my work is really about that, and I'm now more or less starting to do some of that research.
Thank you. There was a ton there to unpack, I think. I mean, I think certainly the pandemic has shown a lot of the gaps in the systems, as you said, right? So the way in which we don't have organizations, the way in which folks in communities of color just like aren't necessarily well-versed or able to have these conversations with their children in ways that are helpful and supportive sometimes. And so, I mean, I'm curious about, in your own life, in the research that you've done, where do then queer kids go to kind of figure out identity and sexuality? Because I'm really curious about that, right? Like, I think we still have to do the work, but where does that happen then?
Well, I think cities tend to be the sort of hub for the overflow of kids who, and cities is where we find the bulk of resources and support systems for queer and trans youth. We are seeing that slowly grow out. Shopping malls, believe it or not, is another place I think a lot of queer youth hang in terms of spending time. I also think there's an issue around school suspensions where I think we don't really attend to that issue enough around what it means to be bullied in school. And so kids will generally sometimes avoid going to school. I know I avoided going to school many days as a young person because I was so afraid of being bullied in school. And so, I know that is not going to change today. That's not going to change overnight. In terms of the cities, I think there's a number. I mean, there are quite a few support groups that, regardless of your race, you would go to because you feel comfortable. What happens in those spaces is a different issue in terms of how they may get service. And I think this is what happens. Youth will create new families. And we have to understand the creation of a family in the absence of family support is critical. It's essential. It's what they will do. And so I think you'd create families, and when they create that family of support, that's where they turn to for that support around what it means to deal with their identity issues, sexual orientation. And I also think that the sort of community groups that provide support for young people in the city are becoming more and more known. And part of that has to do, of course, with the internet. Other than the shopping malls and these groups, I think generally you also find that a lot of young folks who are coming out are now starting to create support groups in schools. So schools are also becoming very progressive around creating support groups. And I think more and more you find that young people have a very rich, healthy way of understanding sexuality that didn't exist in my time. I mean, a group for anybody today, you know, I didn't have a queer group growing up. And so where do they find support? They find support within these support groups. And I think they're very creative. Necessity is the mother of invention. They create their support groups. And unfortunately, what we don't have is community service supports to work with them to provide the kind of issues around retention in school, success in school. Their lives are very stressful. So sometimes I know that students sometimes may not complete a grade or complete university because of stresses around sexual orientation and coping with having to live alone. So I think those are some of the kind of issues that we are seeing. As for Black men, I also think that you would find that a lot of Black women are very supportive of Black men who are queer. And in a lot of ways, Black women play a critical role in supporting Black young men. And I think there's a way in which the community supports queer, trans, Black men and women that are coming out, and queer folks that get supported by some people who provide what they call them houses or homes, but not in the literal sense of a government term, but a safe haven for young Black kids. I knew of some of those growing up when I was coming out in Toronto. So I don't think it's going to change overnight. So I think that's another place in which they find support within the Black community, but not necessarily within Black social services.
Yeah, totally fair. I see Nicolette wanted to respond, so I'm just going to pass it over to her.
Yeah, I wanted to just maybe pose a question or kind of discuss how can we work towards deconstructing this, I guess, fear in the Black community or hesitation in the Black community or ACB community to talk about this openly, and how we address the parenting side of it. How do we talk to parents that weren't raised in the world where kids are being raised in now, and a less inclusive, era that they did grow up in? How do we then talk to parents and work with them and help them to work with their kids and be open to their kids and listen to their kids and support them? That's just what I thought of. I was wondering maybe if you had ideas on that or.
No, it's a good question, and thank you for the question. I think in a lot of ways, we can't blame our parents for not having the education that they should have had around these issues. I mean, I was raised in the Caribbean. I was raised to be, nobody raises your kids to be gay. All right, you're raised to be heterosexual, and you're assumed to be heterosexual until you declare otherwise, right? So we live in a cis heteronormative world, and no one is assumed to be gay at all. Right, so that whole assumption is what we need to break down. How do we give kids choice, allow them to have a choice? Socialization from young. Let's talk about young Black men and socialization. You're socialized to be hyper masculine. You are socialized to have lots of girlfriends. You are socialized to leave the house early and not come back home, and it's cool. You're socialized to do everything. You can have many girlfriends, but your sisters can't have many boyfriends. You can, so there's a whole double standard of a hyper masculine socialization that encourages, nurtures, and supports a type of masculinity as violence, as opposed to masculinity as an ethic of love, or masculinity as an ethic of care. And so therefore, Black men are somehow implicated in this notion and a trope of a masculinity that is really about violence and hypermasculinity. And unlearning that is not easy. You are rewarded for that. So the more hypermasculine you are within your home, your parents think you're cool. The more hypermasculine you're among your friends think you're great. So any sign of tenderness is not rewarded. So we have to find ways to reward tenderness. We have to find ways to reward young kids who say, you take your kids to shop. Your kid is going to be at that age soon where it's going to start picking out what it wants. If he picks up a doll, what are you going to tell him when he picks up that doll and he says to you, Nicolette, mommy, I want this doll. Okay, you may say, no problem, let's go cash it out. You get to the cashier. What does the cashier go? Do you realize your son has the doll in his hand? So the policing of masculinity does not stop. And so how do you now say to that cashier, and so what? That's what he wants. Well, these are the kind of risk we have to take in society. But there's also the risk of taking it in a time and place when you know it's calculated and it's safe. So we still have to calculate for young people, okay, who's going to put shelter over my head? Who's going to pay my school fees? Who's going to, so as long as there's that economic dependency in a capitalist society, capitalism is going to reproduce violence. Capitalism is going to reproduce patriarchal violence. And capitalism reproduces violence in every aspect of our lives. And so the mere fact that a child has to be dependent upon a parent to be able to live what I call a lie, because they can't tell their parents the truth, and they're not lying to themselves, right? They're not lying to themselves because they know who they are. So what homophobia teaches us to do is to lie. And we are not lying because we want to lie. We are lying because we want to survive. It's a very different, I call it survival skills. And so you end up doing those things and not being honest to yourself. So when your parents find, you could have told me, I suspected this so long, and you had me wasting my time with you raising your son and you doing, well, you didn't create the environment for us to have that conversation. You never said to me, can I talk with you? It's okay if you are whatever, And
I think that's so important when we talk about parenting, because, when Salima asked me, what would you tell your younger self? I'm thinking to myself now, you want your child to feel that they can explore themselves, explore their mind, who they are in soul, body, everything, before they have to go to somebody else to learn about that, and know that they can be comforted and themselves in their home. And when they can't be, it's very difficult when you're trapped in your own mind and you're just battling yourself, right? I catch myself all the time. I say things to my son, oh, you're a big, strong boy. Good job. But where did that come from, right? Like, that's coming from somewhere. We're not born with that in our brains, right?
Centuries of socialization.
It's definitely active unlearning. And it's the same thing when we talk about race. It's active unlearning, right? It's active decolonization. And that's what we're talking about here as well. It's definitely active unlearning. And it's not something that we talk about a lot in the ACV community, but I think by talking about it more, we normalize it more for parents as well.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I don't even think there's a Black gay organization across Canada. We don't even have a national gay organization that is Black, or I don't know if Asian or South Asian, but there's no Black gay groups that I can think of that are fully funded by the government. Plus, you have white gay groups.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all excellent points. I'm curious about, I know Samir's been waiting patiently and I kind of want to tag him in. Because your experience has also been from a different perspective. I understand your parents moved here from England when you were young. And so I'm curious about how that dynamic works, because it is slightly different from our other two panelists, and how much of this has resonated with you and what parts of it have really stood out for you.
It's been actually very eye-opening to hear everyone else's comments. And I wanted to thank Mama Watali for giving me the opportunity to be here. Being a public servant, I have to give a quick disclaimer before I open my mouth. The comments or opinions expressed by me are my own and do not represent the position of the Public Prosecution Service of Canada or the Attorney General of Canada. So now that's out of the way. It was actually, like I said, very eye-opening to kind of hear Nicolette and Professor Crichlow's, commentary. For me, I was born in London, England, and we moved to Canada in 1986. So I would have been around 4 or 5 years old. And again, both my parents are from Ghana, in Western Africa, and both well-educated individuals, but there was some political uncertainty in the country at the time that forced my father, who was in the government, to, flee, and ultimately we ended up in Canada. So at that time, I think a lot of the social pressures and stigmas associated with being a visible minority that we see today were present back then. We came, basically with the clothes on our back, right? So we lived in social housing. We didn't have a lot of money, and the area we lived in and the schools I went to were predominantly white. So I didn't get to see a lot of people who look like me. I didn't get to hang out with a lot of people who look like me. So in terms of hearing Professor Crichlow's comments about double consciousness and kind of identifying yourself based on other people's perception of you, that was something that was big for me growing up, because I could only look to my white peers and see how they acted and how they were raised and how they interacted with their parents and how they interacted with their girlfriends and whatnot. And in a certain respect, kind of didn't mirror that, but thought that to be normal. And ultimately, I benefited from having a rigid and strict parent who was able to basically grab me by the ear and refocus me and give me a sense of self, and through kind of really grounding me, allowed me to develop my own identity and allowed me to basically block out what other people's perception of what it meant to be Black. I get a lot of comments when I was in school, like, they call you like Oreo, right? Because you were Black on the outside and white on the inside, because I got good grades and because, I did fairly well. I didn't get in trouble. And because I didn't have those negative traits, those quote unquote Black traits, I was more white than Black, right? So that kind of moving away from those prescribed notions of what it meant to be, one, a man, two, a Black male, and three, a Black male immigrant who's trying to find their way through Canada. This notion of kind of double consciousness, really resonated with me. And Nicolette, Nicolette, when you were talking about, again, getting confidence and trusting in yourself and kind of blocking out the noise, that was, critical to my ability to kind of get to where I needed to be in life, because there's always people out there who are trying to tell you that you're not worthy or that you're other, and it's hard to ignore all those voices. So really grounding yourself and getting that confidence as early as possible, I think, is essential to our growth as a community. And your comments about your child and how to raise them in this society. I have 2 young kids. I have a 4-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son. And when Professor Crichlow was talking about, if your son picks up a doll and how to react with that, and I find I'm dealing with those things right now. My son sees my daughter painting her toenails. My wife paints her toenails. My son wants to paint his toenails, and I'm like, okay, fine, go for it. But my initial reaction is, well, that's not a boy thing, right? That's a girl thing. And I catch myself because, I fancy myself, an open individual and, without any prejudice towards anyone. But there is still that socialized reflection, instinctive reflex to say, well, that's for girls and this is for boys. And, I find that I am conscious of that, and I try and do my best to ensure that it is my son's choice, whatever he chooses to. And he wears pink hats, and he wears dresses when he sees his sister dressing up, and he's happy, and I let him do his thing. And he's 2 years old, and obviously his choices are somewhat limited, but we let him make his decisions, and it takes us where it takes us, and there's no judgment on that part. But again, coming from first generation immigrants from Ghana, that's a mindset that I'd had to develop kind of on my own. My father's very open-minded, but again, speaking to Nicoletta's point, they were grounded in a different milieu where they learned different things based on culture and perhaps religion, and that influenced how they raised us. But certainly having those discussions with at least my father, he's been very open, and his mindset has evolved and moved on a lot of things, and I've found that helpful.
Yeah, I'm always amazed by how much overlap there are in these narratives, despite kind of these differing routes and ways in which we might have arrived here. And I think that really speaks to the fact that there are kind of these broad brushstrokes that are painted by capitalist systems and colonial systems, and how that affects all of us. Samir, I'm curious about, for you with your work, a lot of, I think, what we've talked about in terms of how Black youth are portrayed, how particularly young Black men are portrayed, this sort of hypermasculinity thing that I think Professor Crichlow was referring to, like, how does that show up in your work? And, for you as a public prosecutor, are you also in a position where you kind of have to maintain and break down systems simultaneously? Like, I'm really curious about what that's like for you.
Well, I'm relatively new to my role at the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. I can tell you that in my role as a defense lawyer for 10 years, I did see a lot of, quote unquote, hypermasculinity, amongst my clients that were from visible minority communities. And, unfortunately, I think that stemmed from being raised in an environment where many of them didn't have fathers that were present to either guide them or show them what true masculinity should look like, So I do agree with Professor Crichlow that there is this move to raise boys in a hyper-masculine, hypersexualized, aggressive way, and it closes them off to being able to ask for help. It closes them off to being able to not follow the pack and question what is right and what is wrong. And unfortunately, as a defense lawyer, I would see them at the end of middle of the road, so to speak, after the quote unquote act has been done. And, those those mindsets have already, taken hold in the individual. And I was trying to help them deal with the aftermath, either through their court case, their trial, and to a certain degree, trying to show them that there were other opportunities out there if they were willing to take them. So to answer the question, yes, that it is prevalent amongst my clientele when I was a defense lawyer. When I was a prosecutor, again, I saw that in all of the male accused that I would come across. And so I don't think it's something that's unique to the Black community. I think it's something that is prevalent across the board. And, the more exaggerated, the more that image is pushed, I would tend to see a lot of those individuals at the exaggerated spectrum of hypermasculinity and hyper aggressiveness in my office, unfortunately, and across the dais for me when I was a prosecutor.
Yeah, I think that really does speak to sort of that role of parental authority in whatever form it takes, right? Like, I think whether you had parents who were open and supportive, as I think the conversation has indicated, or even I think as Professor Crichlow was saying, this idea of having chosen family and how that might ultimately help to shift those perceptions. Professor Crichlow, did you want to speak to that?
The concept or the idea that, and I want to be cautious how I say it, the absence of fathers. I don't think it's necessarily a precondition for young men not having good role models. I think what the absence of fathers does is buy into a racist stereotype of Black families. But if we understand Black communities as the whole notion of how we have non-blood lineage family members, the community still survives with many other people acting as parental roles in their lives. And we see this happening in many communities, Black communities across the diaspora. But one of the things I think the absence of Black fathers syndrome that is used as a demonizing element of Black men is that it somehow uses that as the modus operandi for explaining hypermasculinity in particular men, or the lack of direction. So Black women raise kids on their own and raise them successful too. So I think we need to look at how the societal pressures that is beyond the family scope also has a major peer influence on framing and shaping people's sense of self and masculinity. When we look at, if we talk about, name 5 Black people here now that are important to you, they're not going to say Amir, Nicolette, Wesley. They're going to call Obama, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, the quest for a Black masculinity is the attainment of an unachievable goal. And so we need to find ways to bring it down to something that is attainable. In the Caribbean, we have an expression, you cannot hang your hat where your hand cannot reach. And so we have this way of raising Black young men to have them hang their hat where their hand cannot reach. And so we have to find a way to raise Black men that is not about a hyper performance of self-inflicted violence, but about being themselves. And I mean, simple things like mental health. Black men don't attend to mental health as they should. And Samir probably sees a lot of this in his courts. The other issue is HIV. HIV is highest in the heterosexual Black community, not the Black gay community. Why? Because of how men are sexualized, how Black men are socialized to understand one's body does not belong to someone else. One's body belongs to oneself. So how do we understand HIV as something that is spreading within the Black community? It's again about that whole notion of hyper-masculine privileged property ownership. And in the absence of wealth and in the absence of having power, we find that maybe these relationships become their sense of power. These relationships become their sense of identity, and they form their identity through those things. And often the pressures placed on them are not the kind of pressures that they are disciplined for, rather they're rewarded for those pressures. So we have to find ways to understand how the prison plays a role in socializing our people. If we are over incarcerated, then the prison is socializing our masculinity also. So there's a hyper prison masculinization that we have to undo and unlearn. And so sending folks to prison should not even be an option for the Black community. We should have a Section 718 amendment to just defer Black folks away from the prison system as much as possible, so that state structural violence doesn't continue to sentence them into learning prison masculinity. When they come out from prison, what do they have? A hyper prison sense of masculinity that is brought onto the street. So I think there's all these other social forces. High unemployment, what does it mean? Creative means of survival. High literacy rate, what does it mean? Creative ways of survival. And if you are going to be restricted to blue collar type work, then you are going to be hypermasculine by extension, because blue collar work is not sitting in an office, right? So if we look at the spheres of work, there's a religious Black masculinity. There's a working class Black masculinity. There's a spiritual Black masculinity. There are various forms of Black masculinities, but we don't speak of the varied forms, because that which dominates Black masculinity is the state-sanctioned, ordained notion of a hypermasculine.
From, when I was speaking about the absence of fathers, I was speaking from an anecdotal standpoint, because as a defense lawyer, I would have be in my office, and I would have, usually mothers come, sit in front of me with their head down, and trying to, get help for their son, who unfortunately has been accused of, whatnot, right? And it was rare that I saw the fathers in these meetings. So I was often watching the interaction between the mother and the child, the son, usually, and watching her trying to speak to her son and trying to rationalize with her son, and I think it was more so for me, because they thought that there was a perceived judgment, coming from me, because they were sitting in front of me, kind of airing, quote unquote, their dirty laundry, right? And my role was to be there to help them. I had no judgments to be had, but it was often, I saw this interaction between mothers and sons in my office, and I don't say the desperation, but the effort that they were trying to make to reach their son. And on the other end, I would see the sons, again, with this more aloof, kind of disconnected approach, which again, I thought was more posturing for me than it was, their actual true relation to their mother. And again, it was just kind of this like game that was kind of being played, or the charade that was being played in front of me. And unfortunately, I think because a lot of communities, whether it's visible minorities or not, it's a patriarchal kind of male-dominated society, right? So we have young boys and men who feel that it's not cool to listen to your mother. It's not cool to be deferential or be perceived to be deferential to your mother. So I was more speaking to that point. But again, it's not as simple as, having fatherless,
Oh yeah, and I wasn't critiquing what you were saying. I just wanted to take it further, because I think there's so much literature about this Black absent father, and it's not doing justice to understanding the broader structural issues. How many Black women are here as domestic workers? How many Black women here as international students? This whole history of immigration is based on breaking up families, right? And brain draining. And so I think people need to, whenever I hear the question, it's one of those that I always like to take further, because the Black father absence is a racist standing joke. It's a stereotype, and it just doesn't augur well for building the kind of responsiveness in the community for respecting the role that Black women play in raising kids. Because we are somehow saying that a Black woman must have this Black man to raise this child, right? No.
I'm gonna tag Nicolette in here because I think that she should get a chance to speak to that. Go ahead, Nicolette.
Listening to the conversation, I think to a book, I don't know if anyone's read it. It's called The Mothers by Britt Bennett. It's a lovely book. And she tells a story about a girl, and she it's a coming of age story, but it's really about how the community helps her grow. And she goes through things like abortion, having sex for the first time, things like that, and how her community really helps to center her without being very connected to her parents. And I think as a young person and growing up in Toronto, I see a lot of that, of your community raising you, whether it's your church, whether it's your friend group. And when we see young males specifically that get on the wrong side of the law, let's say, or are caught up in situations that are not ideal for them, that propagate this negative stereotype, we have to look at the communities that they're growing up in and the things that are around them. It's this much bigger picture that we're all aware of that a lot of people don't really look at. It's not about the absent father. It's the community that they're in, and why are they in this community? Like we said, there's capitalism, there's, we're in a racist society. There's a lot of things that are contributing to this, and it's not just the absent father. And when it comes to parenting that, as a parent, you can be aware of your child, and you can think that you know your child entirely, but this community that your child is growing up in plays a huge role, and being involved in that community and being involved and being aware of what your kid and who's around your child. I think that plays a huge role in parenting your child when it comes to not only sexuality, but everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that really speaks to this idea that when we talk about parental authority, we tend to look at it in very colonialist white frameworks, right? Where it is like a nuclear family of a mother and a father. And for a lot of communities of color, that's not reflective of our experiences contemporarily, but even historically, right? We come from communities. And so when we ask questions about why things are looking the way they are, there are broader questions, I think. And I think you've all pointed that out effectively. I wanted, just before we go to audience questions, I wanted to ask, because I think it's relevant to all of your lives and to the conversation very much so. Bill C-22, which was just tabled, which was aiming to repeal mandatory minimum sentencing. I'm really curious about what your thoughts are on the effect that that's going to have on Black communities. I know we've talked a lot about incarceration today. Just how you think that might impact this broader conversation about what these communities could look like if we didn't have a carceral system that looked the way that it does. So whoever wants to go first.
Okay, I'll go. I don't like the argument for Bill C-22. I do not think that Blacks are over-incarcerated for drug use. I really think that the framing of this as an argument that's going to reduce over-incarceration of Blacks in the criminal justice system, it presupposes that Black charges are predominantly drug-related. So that's my first problem with Bill C-22. The second is, if we want to treat drug-related offenses for minor drug-related, whatever American speaks better this to me, we can define the percentage that we want to treat as a medical, but not use the Black and Indigenous community to argue that this is going to reduce overrepresentation. It is more complex than that. So when we look at how schools and social services and a whole slew of other systems operate as filters to the prison, we know it's not just drug charges that Black folks are going before the courts for. I also wish the government had reproduced some stats to show the kind of charges on any given year or span of the last 5 years to say, okay, our argument that this is going to reduce Black over-incarceration is based on this. Here we have federal charges. Here we have charges in which we can show you that the bulk of charges for Black men and women incarcerated was criminally related to drug trafficking, drug use, etc., possession. There was no statistical fact release other than we know that Blacks are over-incarcerated. But we also know that there are many reasons why Blacks are over-incarcerated because of over-policing, under-policing. We know that poverty, we know that homelessness, and a whole slew of other issues that constitutes over-incarceration. So is Bill C-22 going to be really doing what it says for the Black community? I don't think so. I think Bill C-22 is driven by other folks, not the Black community.
Samir, did you want to comment on that?
Well, Bill C-22 is basically kind of fresh off the presses. And, I listened to Minister Lametti's comments with respect to the goals on C-22. And again, without speaking to the propriety of the act or anything of that nature, I think the broad strokes is that it comes from a place of recognition that I think it's actually beneficial to recognize that the act in of itself, or the bill, recognizes that there is systemic racism in the justice system in particular in relation to incarceration, and that notion has been around for quite some time in relation to First Nations and Aboriginal offenders with the Supreme Court's ruling in Gladue and Ipoli, and Professor Crichklow's talk about an amendment to Section 718 to take Black offenders out of the carceral setting. There was a recognition of that under Section 718.2E in relation to Aboriginal offenders and trying to use the least most punitive disposition available in recognition of some of these systemic factors that have been decimating the First Nations community. But there hasn't been to my recollection, there hasn't been a statute-based recognition of that in relation to Black and visual minority Canadians. So the commentary from the Minister Lametti in relation to the correlation that this is at least whether a quantitative response or qualitative response to systemic racism, in the justice system, I think that is significant. Does it or will it address the over-incarceration of visible minorities, Black individuals? That remains to be seen. I take Professor Critchlow's point in relation to whether there's a direct correlation in terms of the drug offenses and the over-incarceration of visible minority communities. There also is part of the act a movement to reduce or eliminate some of the mandatory minimums in relation to other offenses. But the proof is going to be in the pudding, and unfortunately we won't know that for, some 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, right? But I do think it's an important first step. I think that the recognition that, possession charges, and again, being a federal prosecutor, that's going to be basically my bread and butter, right? Someone gets pinched with, half a gram of this or that. Is that worth rooting their life over? And by taking that off the table, then I think it's going to have a bit of a cascade effect in terms of the other issues that fuel the over-incarceration of visible minority communities, such as, if a possession charge isn't on the table for the police, then we may move away from some of these over-policing of certain communities. But again, does the act directly speak to that? Those other issues? No, but I think it is at least a recognition that there is this issue that needs to be addressed in the criminal justice system. And hopefully this is the one of many first steps.
Thank you for that. I mean, obviously we could have a whole panel on just this issue. So this is not enough time. I recognize that it's a big topic. I did want to give the attendees time to be able to ask their questions. Professor Crichlow, did you want to respond first?
No. I was just going to say that I think that the bill needs more public consultation, and what it means to take police out of that process. The minute you have the police involved in that process about deciding, it's not going to reduce the kind of tensions that exist with Black communities in policing. So if we really want to treat this as a medical issue, it has to be driven by medical professions and the medical community and experts in that community. So I think some more consultation is needed in that area to ensure that police is not going to be the first to be responding to these medical.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point. And as I said, I think this is like a deeply complex topic, and I think touches on, as Nicolette said, right, like there's bigger issues here at play that I think, like, yeah, obviously a 5-minute conversation on the bill is not going to get us to. But I do want to recognize that there's a lot of good stuff here that, I don't know, maybe we can have a session on another day specifically about this, because I do think that there's a lot here that we could still unpack. We do have a few questions in the Q&A. So the first one was for Nicolette, and it goes back to something you said sort of at the very beginning about what it's been like parenting in a pandemic. And so the question was about how you identify the mental strains in your little one, and how they're kind of managing the stress and what resilience might look like.
Yeah, it's so weird being a parent in a pandemic. You know, my child had never interacted. He interacted with maybe one other child his age. Doesn't get to go out a lot, doesn't get to see his grandparents a lot. It's very strange. I come from a very big family, so I'm used to, you know, being at this aunt's house, that uncle's house, or my grandma's house every day or something. So it's really, really strange. And I do notice it takes a strain on him as young as he is. You know, there's days where he's like super bored, doesn't want to play with any of his toys, and like just visibly like fussy or irritated. And we take him outside and his mood is completely changed because it's something different. You know, he gets to see his cousin and his mood is completely different. And we have to be attentive to those little kids' needs too, I think. They're just as drained with this pandemic as we are. Everyone he sees has a mask on. It's very strange. I have to be extra attentive when it comes to my child. He is very busy and very active, and he has a lot of personality, very big personality. So when I notice something is off, or he's a little too quiet, a little fussy, not playing with his toys, wants to watch TV, I'm like, okay, we need to get outside. We need to do something. We need to go on a walk, something, so that, you know, because his mental health is important too. And that's something as a parent, I try to, you know, actively remember every day, because also growing up in my home, mental health was not something we talked about a lot either. That's a whole other conversation, obviously a whole different webinar. But yeah, and so that's something I actively integrate in my own home is, you know, talking to my partner about their mental health and my son, who's only 13 months. But yeah, I think that's kind of the gist of it. Yeah,
that's awesome. And yeah, absolutely. Another webinar sometime about mental health specifically. And I'm happy to be there for that conversation too, because that's what I do. The second question was related, and it was for Samir. I think when you were speaking about, you know, your son and sort of that initial response that you have about like, oh, this is a girl thing or this is a boy thing, and how that might shift for you as you allow and or encourage your child to sort of explore. And the question was about, like, is it okay sometimes to say, well, this is the thing that girls do, or this is the thing that boys do? And, you know, are there age limits that you want to have on how you speak to those kinds of issues? So I want you to answer that, and I'm gonna ask Professor Crichlow to also respond to this question.
I guess the answer is I don't know, right? What I do is as he picks up something or as he explores, there's no determination on my end what is a boy thing or what is a girl thing. One of my pet peeves is, you know, pink is a girl color and blue is a girl color. Like, we eliminate that in this house. Like, there's no colors don't have genders or sexes or anything like that. So there's a lot of that in the house. Is there going to be an age where that will change? I don't think so. I don't think so, because I think that's a lesson that is true when he's 2 years old and is true when he's 22 years old. So I don't see that as something that's going to change. Will I have to have conversations, quote unquote, man to man with him at some point? I'm sure that's going to have to happen, but I don't think they're going to have some of the tropes that, you know, we see on sitcom TVs and things of that nature. You know, it's more going to be, when you're out late at night, be careful, and things of that nature, right? It's going to be less about, well, son, you have to be a man and take charge and all that. No, my wife is very, has a very strong personality and background, and she, is very open in terms of the types of experiences that both my son and my daughter have. So there's no line drawn in the sand for me personally in terms of, when I will kind of deviate to more drawing the line of what is kind of a boy thing or what is a girl thing, or I think it's just what is a human thing, and then we figure it out from there.
I would like to add something.
Yes, please go.
The only time I'm introducing my son to the potty, so that's where this context is coming from. But I have to explain to him, mommy sits down on the potty, daddy stands up. Those are things that I explain are girl and boy things, and also just having him understand his own body. Now that he's getting older, he's very interested in, okay, this is my tummy, right? And he's touching himself a lot. So being open at this age even and explaining those things to him I think is important in them understanding the differences and what their body is and what mommy's body is and things like that, and why it's different between girls and boys. You can start at this age, you start older, but I think that is, for me, is the important differentiation in regards to the question.
Professor Crichlow?
I think that we need to allow room for gender bending without even naming it. So the idea that boys stand and pee and women sit and pee is wrong. It's not true, right? Men sit and pee also. So what I'm getting at is we have to be so cautious of how we construct a heteronormative masculine rigid framework with good intentions, but the reproduction of patriarchal values. And so I really think that gender bending is something we need to talk a little more about. And I say so from the standpoint of South Asian communities, where part of my family from the Caribbean is Muslim, Hindu. And so I see this aspect of my family where South Asian men have a very different gender role expectation and stereotype than Black men. How these stereotypes play themselves out in terms of how we understand gender is going to be critical, because if we ourselves still subscribe to the notion of homo, hetero, and gay and straight and bi and male and female, we are not going to let kids be free. Gender is a prison. How you free kids from gender as a prison is going to be critical. Gender prisons us every day. Gender teaches us to lie. Heterosexuality teaches us to lie. Homophobia teaches us to lie. All these things teaches us to lie and not be honest. So I think that the challenge is to let go, which is not easy, because I think letting go, people assume that's not raising a child right. But watching a child and observing a child and intervening when you think it's becoming dangerous is a very different thing. But letting kids choose and decide and be free. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to exist is what I think we should be raising kids on the basis and the premises of.
Thank you for that, Professor. I think, and I work predominantly in Muslim communities, both Black and South Asian mostly. And yeah, the sitting down to pee is totally a thing, right? Like that's just a thing in a lot of Muslim communities. And so it's interesting how we construct these ideas about what sex and gender mean, and how it does ultimately end up alienating folks that are already marginalized. And so, and even if they are cis and like there's still ways in which that can be alienating. And so, yeah, it's a fascinating conversation. Mm-hmm. I'm going to redirect us slightly to the next question, which was in response to our conversation around Black fatherhood in particular. And the question was around how we can encourage Black single mothers to appreciate the need for children to know and connect with their dads, as well as both sons and daughters might need to. So I think that question touches on a lot of points that I think came up. So I don't know who wants to go first, but I think it's worth having a conversation about the relational aspect of, a partnership that has produced a child, and how does that continue in raising the child should that partnership dissolve? So anyone want to stab at it?
Well, are we talking effectively like kind of reducing or removing parental alienation, or are we talking more building a relationship between, because it's got a lot of facets to that question. Like from, all I can speak of is from my anecdotal experience, in practice, again, seeing individuals coming into my office, if we don't have a kind of cohesive front in terms of being able to support the young man, young woman, whoever, then the person can suffer. So obviously having a relationship with both could be very helpful and beneficial to the young individual. But there's so many facets that could influence whether or not that there is going to be a relationship. There could be domestic violence as between the two partners, which would preclude the partner X from associating with partner Y. There could be a history of sexual abuse, and having to contextualize that for the young person and explaining why there isn't a relationship could be traumatic or harmful to the guardian, the parent who has the child. So I don't think that obviously it's beneficial, but I don't think that there is an impetus to force that upon anyone if they're not comfortable, given that there could be secondary issues that are influencing that decision or that choice.
I agree, if I can just step in. I think that when it comes to creating a relationship with your parents, that's between you and your parent, if that makes a lot of sense. I know it's quite simple, but that creating that pressure could distance a child, I feel like, as a youth, growing up in a pretty strict household as almost like an only kid. I was like, if I was forced to be around my parents, I was like, I pushed more. I moved as far away as I could have. I didn't come home a lot, all of those things. And that was because I was being forced to be home and create this relationship. I love my parents to death, but I wanted it to be natural. In that way, I didn't want to be forced into it. And I think also, if it's a situation where your parents aren't together and that connection is difficult, the father has to want that, or the parent, whichever parent it is, has to want their relationship. It's not entirely on the child as well, because it's a parent and child relationship. It's very two-sided in that sense. And I don't think that anyone can intervene. It's between the parent and the child in that respect. And like Samir mentioned, there may be so many other factors that are affecting the child's relationship with that parent that the other parent might not even know also. So that's something we have to consider too when we're talking about parent relationships. There's so many factors, and I mean, every parent-child relationship is completely different.
Professor Crichlow, did you want to give a last word
on that? I think it's complex, and it's complex for some of the very reasons already highlighted by my previous colleagues. But also, too, I think the idea of any kind of compliance doesn't bring about what I would call humanity. If you have to force compliance for a relationship, then it means you are enforcing violence, and then you're not really in allowing kids to have choice. One's body belongs to oneself. And I think we need to let kids know that from young. I think that's the most critical piece to raise a child with. One's body belongs to oneself. And in that way, you create so many other senses of responsibility. We also have to remember that peer pressure is very critical. Young people listen to their friends more than they listen to their parents. So how we relate to kids have a lot to do with how we know who their friends are. And often parents don't really know much about their kids' friendships and their kids' relationships in terms of what is influencing them. We need to take time to, I guess, have more conversations with our kids. What was your day like today? What are you doing? What are you doing tomorrow? What's life going to be like? That we don't have those conversations other than get registered for school, get ready for university, find a job, don't come home late. But those basic things do not create the kind of bond and respect that parents and kids should have and getting to know each other. And I think we just have to change the rigidity around parenting and be more relaxed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks to what I think has been the moral of all of this today, which is that open and honest conversations with children are really what's going to support healthy development of both identity and sexuality. I'm cognizant of the time. So we're just like, we're coming to the end. It went fast because it was a great conversation. And so I'm deeply appreciative of our panelists for making that happen and just contributing so much richness to this conversation. There are lots of places where I know we could have spent much more time. And as I would say, inshallah, at some point later on, we'll get there to a different kind of conversation. But I also wanted to thank Mama Watale for letting us do this, for having me on, for having all of us on, for facilitating these conversations. I know they're much needed in all of our communities. And if you liked this one, there are more. So in the meantime, please spread the word, follow the organization on Facebook and on Instagram and YouTube and Twitter. You can see all the links there. And there's also an email address and contact information here for you for the Ottawa office. And then lastly, we wanted to give special thanks to the funders for this program, which is the Government of Canada through Employment and Social Development Canada funding, which is administered by the Canadian Red Cross. So thank you all. It was lovely, and we really appreciate you being here, and we hope that the conversation was as fruitful for you as it was for me. I learned a ton, and I'm very appreciative. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
For having me.
Thank you, everyone. Nicolette, Samir, and Salima, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you all. And hope when this is all over, I can see you in Ottawa.
It's been great. Thank you all.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.